morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm very excited to have you with us today. I do want to start by saying we are on Zoom meeting, but that's also a little intentional. We want this to be a conversation. We're going to talk about some grant writing 101, good practices that yield results. We are by no means experts, but we do have a lot of experience under our belt. So I'd like to just we're going to walk through just what are some helpful hints there. From there, we're going to go into MOU tips. So what are some tips as you're developing your MOU? And then we're going to hand it over to our Hear From Your Peers, so our local representatives. We're going to talk about what are some tips at the local level. So you get the state level, you get individuals like myself who eat, sleep, and breathe grant writing, like that's been my life for the last 17 years. And then you also have your local constituency. So we think it's a really great hour that we put together for you. But if you have questions, if you have things you want to add or contribute, please use that chat, turn on your camera and I can see that, and then we can unmute you or you can unmute yourself. But I do just want to invite you to participate because I think it'd be just make the session more exciting. So introduction to grant writing. This is my section, so I'm going to just go through some fun stuff with you. I'm going to start to level set. So we just starting with some terms and then we'll move into some tips. Does that sound like a fun idea? You can use those reactions in Zoom meetings, so you can put your thumbs up there and keep going. So first, little application terms, things you want to know what they are. So budget. The budget is the recipient's financial plan carrying out the project. So what is your budget? You want your budget to be clean. You want your budget to be concise. You want your budget to be something that aligns with not only what they're asking, but also with what your institution needs. So one of the fun parts of grant writing is, in my experience anyway, I get to write my budget 3 times for every project that I do. I write my budget for what works in DataTel. I then write my budget for what the funder is looking for within their GATA forms. And then I write my budget for what my RSP, my research and sponsored program office needs. So sometimes you get to have 3 budgets. Most of the time, you're probably going to have 2 because you're going to have your whatever your fiscal entity is. And then you're also going to have your GATA form budget. And those don't dump right into the other one. So you'll want to be sure your budget aligns that way. Grantee is the application of terms. This is a legal entity that has been awarded the financial assistance under the discretionary grant or cooperative agreement. So who is applying for the grant? In most of these cases, this is all of you. You are the grantees, and their grants are coming from the state, which is DCEO, or another of our state agency partners. And then project means the activity described in the application. So a lot of times when you're looking at grant applications, they're going to have a project content or a principal consultant for who is your project manager, and then they might have a fiscal consultant. So you want to be sure you're asking the questions to the proper individuals as you go through just that application process. So some fun strategies, and these are just really, I know this seems a little elementary, but it's very important. Read the directions. Whoever wrote this grant from the state level or from the federal level put a lot of time, energy, and effort into creating those directions. They're not sent out just on the fly. They're not sent out without a lot of intention. So take the time to read your directions and make sure you're following your directions. That's number 2 there. Follow the directions. If they ask for a narrative, produce a narrative. If they ask for a work plan, be sure your work plan meets their specs. If you're looking for what their intent is, or if there are certain things and you're going to sometimes have the rubric, which we're going to get to in a second, but certain levels of the grant application might be worth more points than others. So if your narrative is worth 10 points, but your work plan is worth 50 points, where do you think they're going to need the more detail? Let's go with the points, right? Be sure your budget aligns with your plan. We're going to talk about that, and I'll probably mention it a couple times, but it's really important that it is a project-based budget, not a budget-based project. So, or back or forth, but they have to tie into each other. So you're looking at how, whatever you say you're going to do, you're going to do that, but then what are the budgets that you need to support that? The other thing that's always fun in grant applications is that component of match. So if there are things in your budget that your institution or your entity or your local area are going to provide as match, be sure you put that in your project. Otherwise, those who are reading your application are going to be like, well, wait, how are they paying for this? This sounds amazing, but I see it nowhere in their budget. That's kind of a grant reader's like, oh my gosh, where is that coming from? So these are just, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, some nice little tips there, but reference that rubric. Look at what those guidelines are. As I've mentioned, there's a lot of intentionality in the development of a grant. There's a lot of intentionality in the development of a NOFO. There's a lot of time, energy, and effort put into those. So take the time to read those. That'll just make your application all the better as you apply. Pay attention to the funding priorities. it deems its own slide, not only because I like little pigs, but it just deems its own slide because your funding priorities are really intentionally put in there. They're used to communicate the requirements, content of the focus of an application. They give priority or identify the funder's interest in a specific issue, approach, targeted population, way of focusing your completion, identifying the activities that will be funded in a given year. So depending on where you're looking at, if you're looking at DCEO, they're going to have some priorities, but every funding opportunity, every NOFO that comes down, whether that be JTED or apprenticeship, or special populations or targeted population support, they all have a priority. So most importantly, read those directions, find out what their priorities are, but pay attention that what you're doing is meeting the needs of what the funder has said they want to fund. If you have a great idea, but it doesn't fit with that particular funding opportunity, it might not just be a good fit. Not saying that you can't find another funding opportunity, but sometimes great ideas and NOFOs don't always align. So you want to find a NOFO that meets your best opportunity or your great idea. So what the funders want to know. So when you're writing your proposals and when you're looking at this, what do they want to know? They want to know what the problem is. They want that need statement. So what is your problem? What's the identified issue that you're going to solve? They want to know why your organization can address the problem. There's a bucket of money that's going to be handed out. Why is your entity most eligible, best positioned, in the best, why is your need in your area so significant? So they want to know what your organization can do to address the problem. Work plan, what are you going to do? Absolutely tell them what you're going to do. Don't spend, again, be sure you look at that rubric, but if you spend all your energy and pages writing what your need is and never get to your solution, the grant readers are going to be like, well, wait, I get that there's a need in this particular part of the state, or I get that there's a need in this LWIA, but I don't see what the solution is. And the solution is part of the issue that you want to be sure you identify as well. How much money do you want? That's your budget. Outline what your ask is. What are you asking for from whatever that funding opportunity might be? And then who else is contributing? That's your leveraging, that's your match. So are there parts of what you're going to do that are really supported within your community? Are there parts that you're going to do that's supported within other aspects of your institution or within your stakeholders? What are those other aspects? And who are you leveraging to come and be part of this wonderful program? And I know I'm using very general terms, but that's really the intent. I'm not specifically in on one particular grant opportunity because these apply to any grant opportunity. How will you measure your success? Those are usually spelled out in like timeline measurement. What are those evaluation tools you're going to use? So how will you measure your success? What are your components of evaluation? If you're saying, okay, Amy, I need to know a little bit more about evaluation, like what does that look like? What are some guidelines? What are some tools I can look at? If you haven't checked out the evaluation toolkit that was developed by the IWIB Continuous Improvement Committee, it is a great resource on just general information on evaluation. So I'm not going to go into that a lot right now, but I think Brittany can pop that into the chat and you can look at that link for the evaluation toolkit with that's on our Workforce Academy site. And you can see just what all those fun tools are. There's a lot of information that we've put together to really support that component of evaluation. There was also a fantastic session at the WIOA Summit, because I haven't changed my backdrop yet, around evaluation and those components of evaluation to look at. So there's a lot of resources there. And then how will you keep things going when the funding runs out? What is your sustainability plan? So is this something that is a one and done? Are you planning an event and then you're not planning to continue that event? That's not going to get funded as at the same level as something that you're like, I need this money as seed money, and then this innovation will carry us forward, and we're going to be able to do all these great things with this amount of money. So really look at those opportunities as how you will be able to sustain if the funding is depleted. How are we leveraging? How are we bringing our stakeholders together to have those opportunities to really create these innovative practices? So I've put together, I'm going to pause there though. Let's check out the chat, pause there. Any questions in my introductory couple comments? Okay, I'll keep going. So I've got top 10 grant writing tips. And these are just some fun things I've put together. Again, I've been on both ends. I've reviewed grants and several grants over my 20+ year career. And then on the other side of that, I've written quite a few grants. So, and found areas where I've been successful, and then also always ask for that feedback. If you're not successful, always ask for areas for improvement. Look at it as a continuous improvement model. But if you ever write a grant and you're not successful, find out why, because that'll always help you for the next time up. And they are very willing to submit those notes back to you. So top 10 grant writing tips: be concise. Say what you need to say it in a short amount of time, but be concise. Number 2, assume the audience is not familiar with your program. Explain your partnerships around and your areas of responsibility. Do not throw out 5,000 acronyms and expect that they know what's going on. Also, don't refer to the big program or the think big program or the Bob and Sally's, they don't know. So when you're writing your grant, assume that the audience is not familiar at all and give them those additional details. That will really strengthen your application and help them understand what's really happening at that level. Set SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Set those SMART goals and spell that stuff out for them. This is my goal for this. This is how I'm going to measure it. This is when it will be attainable. This is when it's relevant. And this is my timeline for that. A lot of grant applications are going to ask you for that timeline. When is this going to be completed? Many of us operate in this lovely fiscal year. So you have to start July 1 and it's got to be done by June 30th or it's not happening, right? So when are you going to do those things? The beautiful thing about grant writing is you have that opportunity to say, I'm going to get X, Y, and Z done between now and December. Then I'm going to get this done in the next chunk or the next quarter. So just set your SMART goals. Your funders will appreciate that. 4 is most important, and my children will tell you my favorite word is double check. So proofread before you submit, run a spell check, have a colleague read over the final submission, have someone look over the information, because if you do that, you're going to catch some errors. The other thing that I like to do, especially if you're looking at a competitive grant, is have somebody who's not connected to your program or a little bit more removed from your program read that application. Do they understand what all of the components, all those different moving parts are within your application? Because a lot of times we have great ideas up here, and then when we go to put them onto paper, we miss some of those little nuances that make them be so fantastic. So have someone else proofread for you. And number 5, I know I have it as 5, but it's so important. Don't be afraid to ask questions. During that time, they're going to, the funder, whoever the funder is going to give you opportunities. They're going to say, hey, do you want to join us for a bidders conference? Do you want to join us for a Q&A? Participate in those, yes. And also ask questions. If there's things you don't know, ask questions. So as you're reading through that application, you're reading through all that wonderful NOFO that they put together for you, write down those questions and don't be afraid to submit those and ask those. Look at your rubric. Some entities say you have to submit everything via email. So you have to put it in writing and submit it, and then they'll answer it in a Q&A. Other entities have a nice bidders conference where you can ask those questions, but always, always, always ask your questions. Don't assume. Assuming gets us always in trouble. I'm telling you, every single time. So ask the questions, seek clarification, and you'll really find a lot more success. Number 6, this is kind of on the reviewer side. All items need to be accounted for. Items listed in the budget need to be mentioned in the narrative and vice versa. If your budget has $20,000 going to, tutoring for apprentices, and you don't have any mention of tutoring for apprentices in your narrative, that's kind of a, aha, what's going on here question. So make sure things go back and forth. Project-based budget, budget-based project, back and forth. Spell out your acronyms at least once, preferably the first time you use them. We use a lot of acronyms at the state level. We use a lot of acronyms in all the work we do in workforce development. So spell those acronyms out. Sometimes acronyms mean different things in different areas or in different partners. So for example, DCEO might have an acronym that might mean something different to like IDES. It doesn't happen often, but it could happen. So just spell out your acronyms so everything is level set and everyone's on the same page. Question whether activities are worth repeating. If they're enhancements, explain them. So when you're looking at those renewals, when you're looking at those opportunities where you're getting the continual, or you're getting funded for 5 years, year 1 versus year 2, question whether those activities are worth repeating and why are they worth repeating? What was that evaluation component that yielded such a fantastic result? And then explain if you're making any enhancements. So I'll use my center as an example. We do the WIOA Summit every year. We have done the WIOA Summit. We sit down, we send out evaluations. We seriously look at those evaluations. We talk about continuous improvement. We talk about what needs to go, what needs to stay, what components worked, what didn't work so well. What are those things that we want to improve? What are those things that, they did okay, but we need to enhance them a little bit? And what are those things that worked beautifully? And so you want to have that kind of explanation in there if you're looking, again, if you're in year 1 or 2 of a 5-year program. New fiscal year does mean new plan. This also is kind of goes with 8. So you want to be sure that you're highlighting enhancements, but you also don't want to be cutting and pasting and just changing the fiscal year on any applications that are those continual programs. Don't be afraid to be innovative is number 10. Look for new solutions to old problems. Since the pandemic, I have said that anything that happened in 2019 and before 2019 is irrelevant. Don't tell me we tried it in 2017 and it didn't work. Do you know why? Because brave new world, totally different concepts. So we tried, online learning back then and it didn't work as well. Well, we spent 2 years remote, so it's going to work. Or we have new ways to look at it. And technology is moving really fast. So don't be afraid to be innovative. Look for new solutions to old problems. Look for ways in which you can enhance and I adapt and engage. Questions, comments, anything I missed? Brittany, Andy. I know Courtney and Lee are going to have some extra tips for you.
Well, and Amy, I would just further emphasize, you touched on it a bit, but just emphasize that you may have a funder who puts together a review team in order to review these grants. And some of the individuals may not be directly connected to the project or the program that this grant is for. And so just making sure that we are as specific and explicit in our language when it comes to what we're putting into the grant, those activities, again, spelling out those acronyms, because you may have people looking over it that are familiar with and has some background knowledge of what you're applying for, but may not know, what our alphabet soup really stands for.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And for some of the individuals on the call, would you explain sub-grantees and how that works?
I didn't hear you, Lee. Can you say that again? Sorry.
For some people on the call might not be aware of what grantee is and how that structure works from a grantee to a sub-grantee.
Yes. So within my institution, and again, I believe it's kind of, and I work a lot with federal funding, a sub-grantee is somebody who is taking an aspect of your scope, completing that aspect, and then reporting up to you as the grantee, and then reporting up to the funder. And so if you are a sub-grantee, in my instance, and what I think is good practice is they have the same reporting mechanisms that you have as a grantee. It's not just, hey, Andy, come be my sub-grantee and then let me know how that goes. No, no, no. They have the same quarterly reporting. They have, or whatever the reporting. I said quarterly, but I know now there's everything from monthly to biannually. So whatever that report, again, back to that reading the directions. But they're held in the same regard. And then also for your sub-grantees, in my experience, you want to work with somebody who you are communicating with regularly. I don't just, find Bob out in California and say, hey, do this for me and report back. Because what happens is, nothing against people in California, but that doesn't get done. You want somebody who you have a relationship with. You want somebody who you have continual monitoring with. Again, I might be a little bit overzealous, but I also set up I meet with my grantees and I don't have very many, but those who I do have grantees with, we meet with them at least monthly to go over what's going on. How is that aspect of the project? It's not duplication. It's an aspect of the project that they're handling and supporting and taking care of. But you want that continuous communication, coordination, and collaboration to have it be effective. Andy, anything you want to add to that? You look like you had something to say.
Oh, no, I think you hit the high points. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Next thing, common mistakes. So as you're reading the directions, following the directions, covering all those little top 10 strategies, these are some common mistakes that are made, and this actually is from DOL. So failing to allow enough time to submit via email, via mail, or electronically, so email or snail mail. If you don't, you need to look at, and these are very important words, is it submitted by, or is it received by? So if the grant is submitted by, that means that it has to be posted or sent over email. A lot of things are done electronically now, but it has to be submitted by a particular date. If it has to be received by, you need to be sure that if that means that they have it in hand. If it's not electronic and you get the little notification, you need to allow time for the postage service to take their time. Or you get to overnight and be best friends with the FedEx guy, one of those things. But be aware of that language and also allow enough time for submitting. The other important thing with the failing to allow enough time is what are the protocols? What are the processes within your institution, within your local area, within your board, all of those things. So if you have to operate within those structures, be sure you allow enough time to operate within those structures. So fiscal might, if somebody else needs to approve, who needs to be aware, A, that you're applying for it, and B, that you are asking for this amount, or if you're leveraging partners, make sure your stakeholders are aware, and what does that approval process look like? So second most common mistake is not reading the application package in its entirety. Again, don't assume. Assuming is bad. It's not only bad for 16-year-olds who take the car without asking, but it's bad for grant writers. So read the whole application, go through, get that highlighter out. I'm old school. I like printing them off. I like going through highlighting and then going back and cross-referencing. Am I hitting all of the things I need to hit? But please, please, please take that time to read. Because it will save you hours on the back end if you just read it all on the front end. Not following formatting guidelines. You might have this awesome format that is just brilliant and makes sense to you, but if it doesn't align with what the federal government wants your grant application to look like, they don't care. And sometimes they'll throw it out if you're not following their format. So follow their format. I'm guilty of, I like my budget the way I like my budget. And you're like, well, yeah, Amy, you got to do 3 of them. But yes, one of those is so I know and I can communicate with, once we get the grant, with my internal data tell people. And so I do 3 budgets because one goes to the funder, the GATA budget, right? We all love the GATA budget. One goes to RSP because those individuals have to approve. So my president, I'm at an institution that way. And then one is for my internal individuals that I have to work with. But I don't show, nobody sees all 3. The funder sees what they need to see, RSP sees what they need to see, and then the other side of RSP sees the other side. So all fun things. But yeah, follow those formats. Because I tell you, if I send my pretty colorful rainbow budget into DCEO, they're going to be like, well, what the heck is this? And I'm going to say it's pretty and colorful and it makes sense to me, but that's not what they want to see. So make sure you're following those guidelines. Not obtaining the required signatures on required forms. So this is overly important. And you have to make sure that anybody who's supposed to sign signs, and don't sign for somebody who you're not. I've seen grant applications where Brittany Boston signed as the PI, she signed as the fiscal person, she also signed as the institution, she signed as the board member signing. No, she's not all those people. So be sure you're obtaining the proper signatures. And again, that goes back up to number 1, which is that idea of failing to allow enough time. If you need to get signatures, be sure you have time to get those signatures. In addition to that, be sure to note in that reading if the signatures need to be ink, as in like with a pen, or if they can be electronic signatures. That's going to cut into your timeline as well. And then failing to proofread. So just proofread, and that idea of having someone else read it is so important. Having, I do that all the time. Like I don't make everybody read everything, but I pick a different person depending on what the grant is and have people read them. It doesn't take that long for them to get through it, but it also is just another fresh set of eyes. How many of you, and I want to show of hands here, how many of you have read something and then as you send it to somebody else, it sounds right to you, it sounds great to you, but then you hand it off and it doesn't read the same way, or there's a misspelling in there, or there's a grammatical error that you didn't catch because you're so deeply invested in it that you're seeing it the way you intended it to be read. Show of hands, show of hands. Come on, guys. All right. That's why we have somebody else read it. Just, it's not, and again, it says failure to proofread, but it's really that idea of allowing someone else to give you input, not criticism, but input. So when you're developing a grant, I want you to think about it strategically. Like, how does this fit within your local area strategic plan? How does this fit within all these great entities that we have? So ensure the plan is realistic and everyone in your organization has input. If you're going to be carrying out this plan as an entity, don't write your plan, don't write your grant in a vacuum. Maybe those continuation plans can be a little bit more in a vacuum, but you want to be sure that everyone understands the input. Specify who is doing what in the action plan, include timelines and who is accountable. So for example, if Andy's going to be a sub-awardee for whatever my application is, I want to be sure that he knows what he's doing, what his action plan is, and he might have to have a work plan for that too. In my world, he would. He'd have to submit a work plan to me that then I can include with my reporting up. All about transparency and the funder knowing what everybody's doing. Build in regular reviews and reflection. If problems arise, address it. So I'm not crazy. I know that not everything goes exactly as we plan. If anyone was writing a grant in fiscal year 2020 and we got to March of 2020 and the world flipped upside down, if you all saw that coming, go to Vegas and make some good bets, because I didn't see that coming. So I had a lot of in-person events. The WIOA Summit's another great example. We planned that for April of 2020, right? Many of you were aware of that. I'm guessing some of you are registered. We're going to attend because in January, February, woohoo, we're going to a summit. No, we're not. So regular reviews, regular check-ins. If the problem arises, we address it. How are you going to address it? And then communicate up. That's just good grant execution. Make sure your funder knows what those changes are. Make sure you're aware, and whoever your program officer is the term that's used in most cases. Who are you assigned to report up to? And then ever present, make sure your board members review your plan status quarterly. So keep those board members aware of what's going on. They don't necessarily need to know every single specific detail, but they do need to understand that big picture of what's going on and where they need input. Again, our boards are very busy people, as we all are very busy people. And so where is the places where we can seek input and ask questions that help us develop and make a better plan and plan execution? All right, anybody want to add to those? Any thoughts, questions, comments? All right, I just got a couple more. So if you haven't ever done a SWOT analysis, it is a fantastic tool to gauge the organization's strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So one of the things that, like, every grant that I write for, every grant that I have has different buckets that we have 3 things that we do really well. And if we're doing those 3 things really well, we're going to apply for a grant within those 3 buckets. But if it's outside of that, we don't. We just let somebody else, or we look at, hey, by the way, this is really better for you. So for example, like right there is a wall, and I share that wall with somebody who does behavioral support for special education students in the K-12 system. That is her wheelhouse, and she is amazing at that. That is not my wheelhouse. And I don't write for those things. But maybe some of those strategies help me be a better person and all that good stuff, but it's a weakness for us. It's an area that I don't even dip my toe into. But if we have questions, we know where to go. So, just doing that strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, looking at how you can do a SWOT analysis. If you want some more information on that, we have a lot of that stuff on that evaluation toolkit, how you can do a SWOT analysis, what are some tips and tools and tricks for that. So check that out as well. And then finally, submitting tips. Number 1, do not wait to the last minute to submit your application. Do not just wait. If it's due at 4:30 Eastern time on, Friday, whatever, get it in on Thursday. If you can, get it in on Thursday. If you're submitting an e-application, know how the specific deadlines and date and times are, especially if you're looking at federal applications or anything that is done out of DC. Is always Eastern time. We live in Central time. That is, you're late. If it was due 4:30 Eastern time and you submit at 4:30 Central time, you're not on time. Or am I bad at time zones and you're actually early? But I won't go into that right now. If a competition does not require electronic submission and you're experiencing technical problems in submitting an electronic application, that can quickly be resolved, print your application and submit it in a hard copy before the application deadline. So there is a new system that we have been using with ICCB. I know some of you on here might be aware of that. There were a lot of issues as they rolled that out in last year, FY22. And so we had quite a few that just printed it off, submitted it in, and those are things that you've done. As we move to more electronic submission for the state, that's going to happen. Glitches happen. It's good, but they also are humans. So we're going to have some issues, but that's just a really good note. And ask those questions. Don't assume, ask. And then have a fresh pair of eyes. My gosh, how many times have I said this now? Is it hitting home yet? Have a fresh pair of eyes, read your proposal before submission. Make sure that all the required forms and signatures are included in your application. I am very fortunate that I have a research and sponsored program office that I put everything together and I hand it over, and then somebody else looks it all over and says, okay, you got this, and then I get all the signatures electronically and everything goes in. But if you don't have that, be sure at least somebody else in your office is looking at those grants and those applications. Any questions about grant tips and strategies? Show of hands, did I say anything that you guys were like, I had no clue that that was something important? Show of hand, anybody? Courtney's like, no, I'm in the same world you are, Amy. I live and breathe. All right, got one. Next up is Andy. Andy Lasasso is going to talk to us about some MOU tips.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Sometimes when you are tasked with grant writing, the funder wants to know what partnerships, what relationships, and what friends you may have out there that can assist you. And sometimes that comes down to using an MOU or a memorandum of understanding. So just want to go over at a high level, just some of the global pieces of what is an MOU, and then a couple of tips, and then also some very good resources that come from some of the biggest funders in the federal government for your reference and use. So what is an MOU? Well, a memorandum of understanding is a written agreement. It involves at least 2 or more parties or entities. And not only does it establish an agreement, but it sets the expectations for all the parties and the responsibilities of the parties. Now, those are 2 very different things. Sometimes we think our responsibilities are part of the expectations, but they're not. The expectations are those goals to be met, and the responsibilities are what we're going to do to get there. So set that with a clearly stated purpose, and it may look a lot like you've got a contract. So next slide, please. So is an MOU a contract? Kind of, but not really. MOUs are not, or in only extreme cases, legally binding. An MOU is really a friendly agreement that has no duty to perform, or at least no consequences if those duties to perform of the parties are not satisfied. So MOUs typically do not have penalties, and in my experience, it'd be hard pressed to get them passed through any legal department or executive director that if they did have any kind of penalties to them, because that disincentivizes the other party to participate. MOUs should be more collaborative, friendly, collegial agreements. Because why do we do MOUs? Because it allows flexibility. So there's low or no risk. It displays support for programs or entities. It's also easy to add or to amend the agreement. And unfortunately, and I did see the question pop up in the chat, that makes it also easy to walk away. So when we're writing our MOUs, there's some very specific language that we want to insert that allows us that flexibility and allows us to remain partners, even if we may have had a hiccup and something didn't get met along the way. But I want to revisit that. Let me get to a few other MOU writing tips here. So to start the process, check for existing MOUs. We work and we live in a high turnover industry. Leadership changes, leadership moves, and sometimes, and I've had this happen more than once in my own experience, there's an existing MOU that neither party knew about because there was new leadership, or they had thought that the MOU had been invalidated because performance wasn't met, or one of the gates hadn't been crossed. So check for existing MOUs, and with that, check with your legal representative first, because they may have that. If your organization doesn't have a legal representative, that's fine. Check with your predecessor, check with your executives, see if it's there. And this search and this part of the process will also help you identify who is the signing party. Are you able through your organization to sign with authority and bind your organization to an MOU with another party? Or does that power rest with your legal or with your executive director? So those first 2 steps, very important in setting the stage and making your process going forward much easier. identifying who can sign and if there's any existing MOUs, because you may not like the existing MOUs, it may come time to amend or append it. So complete your negotiations prior to writing. Have open discussions with all stakeholders, all binding parties, to make sure that you have a unified direction and that everybody understands what the MOU should look like prior to drafting, because nothing will raise the shields faster than receiving a document that you don't like, that you're already a party to, in the ether, even if it's not signed. So you don't want any surprises. You don't want anybody putting their guard up because they believe that you're trying to sign them up for something that you don't want to do. So in that process, set your parameters, set your goals, and set your duties, and write around that. And to revisit the last slide, and one of the more important pieces for MOU writing tips is using open language. So if program B will accept referrals from program A, but then program B, something happens. Maybe it's a snow day and they're not able to do an intake on the last day of a time frame that was set in an MOU, or some other extenuating circumstance prohibits program B from taking that particular client, that particular referral, whether permanently or just for that day, or maybe they missed a deadline. Well, now that whole MOU that we all worked so hard on now has this big hole in the side of it because specific performance wasn't met. So use open language. These are supposed to be collaborative, collegial documents. So open language would be stating program B will make every effort to accept referrals from program A in a timely manner. So yes, that timely manner, that can be debated, that can be out there, but we don't want to rope our partners in too tight, because we don't want to be roped in too tight and set ourselves up for failure. So make sure to use that open language, and maybe in another section or another part of the document, define what that timely manner is, and define what every effort is. We'll be open between the hours of 8 and 5. We'll accept referrals at the front desk. We'll accept referrals electronically. Make sure that you're writing it as a friendly agreement, right? We don't want to penalize our friends, or they won't be our friends for much longer as we try and apply for more and more NOFOs and grants. And so some really good online resources that I've used in the past, except for one new one that I found prepping for this that I did like, was a masterclass.com article. It's very short, very sweet. It's basically all headline bullets, but definitely gives you a good flow for assembling your MOU. But some old standards that have been out there for a while come from Health and Human Services and their guide to MOUs, their negotiation and development. A little more condensed model, working with Department of Homeland Security and the FCC. They have a nice PDF out there for MOUs and a nice writing guide for some of their larger programs. While it is program specific, it does have some great global MOU tips in there for your use. So there is the short and sweet on MOU tips. I see that we do have a question in the chat from Kina. What happens when deliverables aren't met in the MOU? Well, that depends on how the MOU is written. If you wrote penalties in there and both entities signed off on it, then those penalties would be exercised. If there is no penalty and a deliverable simply wasn't met, if there's no other clauses in the MOU, it doesn't necessarily mean the MOU is invalid or that it's no longer, or should no longer be used. I think it's an opportunity for both parties to revisit and find out why a deliverable wasn't met, and then maybe amend or append the MOU in a collegial way, so that way both parties are still happy and still moving forward with the spirit of the document. Any other questions? Well, if there's no other questions, I will hand this over to Lee and to Courtney from the Hear from the Peers segment. So thank you.
All right, let me share my screen real quick.
Are you able to share?
I think so.
There we go.
buttons are blocking my access to certain things. All right, good day, everyone. I'm Lee Reese with St. Clair County Intergovernmental Grants. I appreciate you taking your time out this morning to be with us. I want to give you some tips from a local area. We're Economic Region 9 from Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. We're 2 LWIAs, local workforce innovation areas. We're local workforce 22 and 24. And some tips from a local perspective is write the grant and answer the question, notice the funding opportunity. If the person reading, reviewing, or has absolutely no knowledge of your organization, previous work, or the concepts and plans you're writing about. This is probably the feedback I get the most when we do a grant, is that the scoring will come in and say, provide certain feedback, and then the entity that we worked with will come in and say, well, we know you did this project, we know you did that project, why is it not listed in here? And so definitely write this grant as if no one reading clue what you do or have done in the past. Write if you're the only entity capable of producing results that you claim you're able to produce, and then spell out why and how you're that entity. Lean on the experts for their parts, especially where you're weak. So usually when I write a grant, it's a team effort from our agency. I usually do a portion of the narrative, and then our fiscal people do the budgets. And so feel free to give your input to your experts, but let them do their job. Never be your own attorney. And then with regards to the body of a grant, writing a narrative, I like to go through and cut the questions out of the document, put them in the body of my document, and then answer them, and then leave them to the end and have someone else look through the document, read the question, and look at my answer and make sure that I answered it correctly, that I provided the requested information. Letters of support for your grant. We usually collaborate with multiple entities when we are doing a grant and looking at our grant deliverables. And so the letters of support usually are turned around faster if you'll have a template that you send out to your individuals. Otherwise, if you look to them to pass to another person within their organization to try to figure out a letter of support, it will take you much, much longer than if you lay out your scope, purpose, and how you're working together and send that in for a letter of support. Also, with regards to, if you will keep as much legalese out as possible, it'll turn around much faster. So when I'm working with a community college or someone, I just lay out the bare amount of minimum necessary so that if anybody picked up our MOU, they would know who was supposed to do what, when, where, and how, and what was supposed to be the result. And all I have from the local perspective. Are there questions? Well, I'm going to turn you over to probably the best grant writer I've ever worked with, has done quite a few grants for the state and really knows her business, Miss Courtney Breckenridge.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks, everyone. So I'm going to start, and give me just 1 second here to do it. I'm going to start by sharing a link to a Google Drive I put together just for you all. Rather than going through, so there's a presentation in there. I'm going to skip it because I think Amy covered pretty much everything that's in there. What we can focus on instead, and Amy, your team, how long do I have to talk? I was just want to make sure I'm not going over on 11:30. Okay. So what I'd like to do is within that Google Drive, walk through some of the templates and organizing tools and things that I use to help kind of bring all of that to life. So hopefully this works okay if I just share straight into the Google Drive, but I might have to share and unshare a couple of times. So as I said, the full deck there kind of places all of these documents into context, where I use them at various points in the process. But the very first thing, that I would like to show you, can everyone see that okay? and if you open these up on your own, this is the 1-page grant proposal worksheet. So as a younger student, you know, high school, college, etc., I was the student that if a teacher required an outline as part of the submission of a final paper, I made the outline up based on what I'd already written. Like I was always like, I don't need an outline. You absolutely need an outline. Like that is, if there is one thing that gets me through grants and massive proposals and juggling a lot of them at once in many cases, it's having a clear roadmap of what I want to cover, what the agency wants me to cover, and then sometimes what can be a little bit different is what the evaluator or what the evaluation criteria are, which aren't always reflected in the narrative points. And so, as Lee said, I often start with a blank Word document, pull in the required project narrative pieces, and then cross-match the evaluation to that. And so that way I make sure everything that they're asking for is reflected in that outline. And that's my starting point to write to. Backing up a tiny bit from that though, and you know, really looking at this handout, this is something, you know, a foundation a few years ago, or a person from our foundation basically said that if we wanted to be successful in getting philanthropists or donors to the university to write, they needed a menu of things that we had to offer. What are some things that we could do if we had support or projects that might be worth supporting? Similar idea here. So, you know, when we do this with community members, SIUE does offer grant writing classes to local community employees, municipal employees, as well as a non-credit grant writing workshop. Start with your, what do you want to do? So like in 1 page here, what's your big idea? Who are you and why are you the right person to do it? What's the need that this project's going to address? What specific changes are going to result from your work? What do you need to do to make it happen? Who are your partners? Who else has a vested interest in this project? What are you going to need to do it in terms of information, tools, data, or not to do it, to assess how well you're doing? Then number 8 there, what do you need to do it? People, labor, equipment. How much is it all going to cost? And then number 10 there, what broad categories of community needs? What priorities are you going to line up with this project? And so if you start here, in many cases, number 1, it's going to help shape all of that out as you go to write a full proposal. It kind of serves as a mini outline because these questions start to match back up with the various components within a grant. But the other thing that it's going to help you do, and I'm going to go back to the Google Drive for a second, is assess whether or not your idea is a good fit for whatever proposal you're looking at. So the next one I'm going to pull up here is the grant decision chart. And I stole this from, I don't even remember where, I think it has an attribution at the bottom. And it's not perfect. But the big point that I would make with this document is not every grant opportunity is the right opportunity for your project, for you, and really doing your due diligence up front in terms of understanding, does your project fit with what they're looking for? Do you have time to pull it off? I mean, these are very legitimate questions that will save you from not having to spray the gray away, or, you know, dyeing your roots, or whatever it is that happens when you're overly stressed for long periods of time. You know, and so like, first question, does your organization's mission and goals fit the funder's guidelines? And in many cases, that question could also read, are you eligible? I have started down projects before and then realized 2 or 3 days in, oh, we're not actually eligible for this, or it's got to be submitted through. Perfect example, I work with a local tourism bureau. They wanted to write to a federal byway program. And we just kind of started, right? Started mapping it, well, they can't apply. IDOT has to apply. Turns out we were still able to apply through IDOT, but if we had gone through all those steps and submitted something, it would have gone in the trash. It was not an eligible organization. Similarly, I had a municipal partner, he's public works director. And he wanted to write to the EDA Good Jobs Challenge to start a workforce training program for government employees. Starting workforce training for government employees is not a terrible idea. Submitting that to the EDA is an awful idea. EDA is looking to spur new jobs. Government is not a job creator. It would have gone in the trash. So then I said, hey, how about you keep an eye on this DCEO page? Look for something like JTED or apprenticeship expansion or one of these opportunities that's not so focused on how are we creating new jobs and is more focused on getting specific populations into them. So it's really important to make sure you're eligible and that it fits. That next question there, is the funding viable? Is the funding for a viable program that's consistent? Don't start something you can't keep going. Kind of to Amy's previous point about sustainability. If you're going to do something once, a one-off, because you can get the money for it now, but it really doesn't fit with something that your organization does, they're going to see it. They're going to see through it. So, you know, making sure that what you're proposing really is a good fit for the organization you're submitting it through is important. Again, some of these other ones, I'm not quite as crazy about it, but I do like that they lead to forget about it. Is this funding for a program we already have in place? You know, do you need to, you know, add program or support staff? Does the budget support that? And again, this is a little bit of a complex matrix, but I share it because particularly the further along you get in this, there's no shortage of grant opportunities. Not at all. You can find them. And the better you get at looking for them, and if you look through the slide deck, there's some moderately helpful tips for that. And I know it might be weird to, you know, spend so much time in a workshop on how to write grants for me to say no sometimes, but you will be more successful if you submit to the right program for your right idea. So know what you want to do. And then have yourself a tool for understanding whether or not it's a good fit for what it is you want to do. Okay. The next one that I'd like to look at is the grant submission timeline. This one, again, kind of goes hand in hand with the last two. These are some of the steps. And oh, is it going to show? All right. Some of the many steps in the process, which, you know, can take a lot of time, particularly the first time. I agree with Amy. I work at a university. Somebody submits these things for you. I had never seen the inside of grants.gov before. Recently, though, Lee and I worked with 5 local workforce areas to write to an apprenticeship expansion grant. We asked for $6 million to make a by-state, really cool proposal. 2 weeks in or 2 weeks out from the submission, we figured out that nobody at the local workforce areas knew how to use grants.gov or write a federal budget. So I had to do it, which was fine, but I had never done it before. And I have a whole newfound appreciation for our Office of Research and Projects and their very stringent requirements on submission. You know, understanding what you're getting into, you know, and kind of to your point, Amy, too, like, how is it, what's the submission format? A lot of them won't take paper submissions anymore. Some weird outliers will only take paper submissions. And I haven't actually encountered that, but our Office of Research and Projects assures me that it's true. I wrote a $10 million Department of Labor grant a few years ago and did not follow Amy's very good advice of turning it in a day early. So it's the day of, we're uploading everything into grants.gov and the power goes out in the office, like in the building that Office of Research and Project. I'm literally on my phone looking up plane tickets to DC and figuring out if I could still deliver it by hand in a pinch. Luckily, I didn't have to, but these things happen. And there is no worse feeling than getting, you know, to the final day and then something glitches and you can't submit. So, you know, really understanding these different pieces, like, again, you know, that first one there, identification and support. Does what you're looking fit? Is it eligible? Is your boss okay with you submitting it? You should probably ask or tell your dean if you're a faculty member, whatever that may be. Figuring out who your AOR is and SAMs, DUNS, FEIN. Some of these things take weeks to get. That grants.gov story I just told on the grant with Lee, I had a small moment of like panic, like, do you guys even have a SAMS or a DUNS number? Because if you don't, we're out. Like, the ship has sailed. They did, thank God. you've got to write a budget and goals and timeline and all the attachments and the components. And I highly recommend letters of support, and Lee's advice is fantastic. And I think he rounded up something like 20 letters of support for that last grant that we did, in part because he took that template I sent him and he ran with it. And he sent it to everyone who made sense, and they just kept coming back. Make it easy on people, but that takes time too. You notice I said all of that before I said start writing your proposal. And that might seem a little bit silly, but the things that depend on other people, like letters of support and budget approvals, and sometimes, most of the time, it makes sense to start with those attachments before you're writing, because guess what? You can stay up all night, the night before, the week before, but you can't make someone turn back a letter of support or approve your budget in the middle of the night. So, really thinking about what it's going to take. And then again, moving into finalization, you've got a budget, you've got a narrative, you're proofreading, you're handing it off to other folks. You're working with the grant submitter or yourself and learning grants.gov 2 days before it's due, which was super fun. And then again, you're submitting and making sure that you have ample time to submit. So it probably, if you've never written a grant, all of it sounds like a lot. But it's one of those things that planning and really having a roadmap, and that's why I feel like these tools can be really helpful, just in terms of laying out your plan and then having some starting points from, most of these were from successful proposals to move you forward. So I'll pause there for a second. Any immediate questions, and then we'll dive in to some of the more helpful templates for actual proposal development. Okay. So the rest of these are a combination of examples and then fillable templates that you can use. The first one I'll show you is some sample goals and objectives. These are from real grants. I think most of them were funded. I don't remember all, but these are just examples of, my thought process in part, in terms of, how you line up goals, objectives, and activities. And again, anything, SMART goals is a fantastic framework for doing this, but really understanding a lot of it's just breaking things up into their parts, right? Here's my big picture goal. And then your objectives can be kind of those smaller, more concrete steps that you're taking to get there. And then the activities are the steps that you're using to achieve those objectives, which fulfill your goals. Our director of research and projects, who I co-teach this class with occasionally, is adamant that there's this big difference between goals and objectives. Meh. I'm sure that you could very academically argue that. However, in a lot of cases, it's what makes sense for that specific proposal. But just being very clear about what it is that you want to do, and that you understand the steps that are going to take to get there, and what success looks like. Whether you call them goals, objectives, activities, use a work plan, a logic model, whatever it may be, that's what they're looking for. That you have a clue of what you're doing, and you've put your resources and your time into the right places in order to actually accomplish that. You're selling yourself and building credibility that you do in fact know what you're doing, and that's what they're looking for. So you might find these helpful. I'm not going to read through them all, but it's from 3 different grants. This last one didn't get funded. The first 2 did. This one got really good remarks though. And again, ask for those remarks, right? Because that's going to help you strengthen and come in stronger next time. But, again, these are here as examples. Feel free to use them as models. The very first grant I ever wrote was actually that $10 million project. And I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but everyone kind of went along. The reason we were successful, I think, is because it was Department of Labor, and Department of Labor posted all of the successful grants online. So I found one that I thought looked a lot like what I wanted to do, and I used it as a roadmap. It literally sat on my lap. It was a 40-page printed document. And as I wrote each section, I looked at how they'd done it, thought about how I could adapt it for my own idea, and use that as a roadmap. that may be a way that helps you move through some of these. And I think a lot of folks on this call would probably be happy to share things that they've done and written. I know I always certainly am. So, okay. Next, let's talk a little bit about work plans. This is a workforce group. I've noticed the two agencies that I write to that like work plans the best are the Department of Labor and ETA and our Office of Employment and Training. So I have put together here a template. I'm pretty sure this one's borrowed directly from the statewide apprenticeship expansion grant that I wrote on behalf of the state of Illinois last year. I did fill in different examples just to make this more clear cut than some of the nuance of that specific grant. But I mentioned the Public Works Director who wanted to do a government workforce training program. We wrote this for him as an example for that specific class. So, you know, his goal was to fill open public service positions with local residents, emphasizing recruitment and retention of underserved and underrepresented residents. If you've read a couple NOFOs, you can hear there where some of this is very relevant to different priorities that arise through different notice of funding opportunities and relevant to specific agencies, particularly in that second part, recruitment and retention of underserved and underrepresented residents. So a little bit more context there. We wanted to increase the number of public service workers in fields such as, we list some specific occupations. That next section then, and again, this is another roadmap, right? I tell people in our grant writing classes, do this even if it's not required. Just like that first document, it's going to be probably the most helpful thing that you have to turn to when you're answering these weird little questions and prompts that they have within the NOFO. You know, who are you working with? Why are they the right people to be working with? What are you going to do? If you've gone through and filled this out with bullets already, it becomes much easier to expound upon that and turn it into paragraphs. Plus makes a nice little table to help break up your text if you decide to include some or all of it. So, you know, we describe here the goal lead, the goal partners. Again, just I think this one's fairly intuitive. You can see why these partners would make sense. If you're trying to increase the number of people going into public service occupations, you're going to want to leverage WIOA funding. You want that recruitment and retention of underserved people, which means you got to partner with community organizations. Then we go into our activities, what it is we're going to do to achieve that goal. And again, you know, I think this one, you can see the logic, right? And we're not on logic models yet, but in many cases it's, do all of these things line up? Do they show that you know what you're doing? And so if I want to meet that goal up at the top, I'm going to need to know what my open positions are. I'm going to need to recruit WIOA eligible individuals, which means I needed a partnership with somebody who administers WIOA funds. I'm going to need to do really robust outreach. Probably should talk about soft skills and how we're getting folks prepared to not just get a job, but hold on to it and be able to perform well in advance. We might need a better training infrastructure within the city to support an apprenticeship model. A mentorship program could be another way to show we know what we're doing. We're not just going to hire a bunch of people, watch them flounder, and then, you know, call it a day. And then again, I mentioned apprenticeships earlier on, establishing these programs for key public works occupations. Then we go into our milestones, our timeline, or our milestones, our deliverables, how we're going to evaluate it. Again, you might not have to do all of these things. Sometimes the words get mixed and matched. But in this case, I am kind of defining a milestone as we've hit a point, right? A marker where we can report back to the agency and say, hey, we accomplished this. I look at a deliverable as something more concrete. Such as a physical material, a class that was held, a certain number of people coming out of a program. And for each of these, I've put a timeline, you know, roughly when we think we're going to do that within the phase. I think this was kind of envisioned as a one-year grant. And then again, as Amy said, very, very well, evaluation, how are you going to measure your success? And who has that data, right? So in this case, you can see I'm leaning pretty heavily on Madison County Employment and Training and Human Resources. Through WIOA, they're going to know exactly how many people were screened, how many people were placed. And the city will be able to tell us, and WIOA probably, or the Employment and Training probably could too, how long did they stay on the job, right? Were they retained for at least 6 months? Those are going to provide some solid metrics to show the funding agency, you know, that the project was or was not a success. And I think the final category here is funding. I mentioned earlier, a lot of times I start with the budget. This began because ORP made me, and I fought it kicking and screaming. And then I realized that it was actually a very helpful way of making sure it all lined up. Because if you're paying for something in the budget, you need, you know, that's what you're doing, right? And your funding should really be driving or your activities and your deliverables should be driving the funding. So they need to all make sense. If you say your goal is to place, you know, recruit and retain public service individuals, and then you spend all of your money paying the director of human resources, you're probably not going to be successful. It doesn't line up. So making sure that those different pieces match and make sense. And Department of Labor makes you do this for every activity that you have. What are the funding costs associated with this activity? So as Amy said, sometimes she has 3 budgets. Sometimes you gotta like then re-manipulate it to show how your, you know, budget lines are driving individual activities. So that example is there. And then also behind that is a blank version of this. Again, I encourage you, download this, take it, run with it, make it your own, and you might find those helpful. Okay, last one, I think here is logic models. Logic models and work plans are pretty similar. The Department of Labor grant that we just wrote oddly required both, which was fun. And they had very, very specific templates that were required for both. So, you know, pay attention to that. But by and large, if neither is required, pick the one that makes most sense to you and just do it. Again, it will help provide another roadmap, another starting point as you're working through your outline. So this is just a hang on, let me go back for a second. I want to go to the annotated one. I'm opening annotated logic model. This is going to show you, this is kind of a definitions page. And then the other one's a blank version that you can use to fill out yourself if this is the tool that you think helps you. Yeah, is this going to open? We'll give it one more second. Okay, so this is a really ugly slide on here. It probably looks better if you downloaded it and open it in Word. But a lot of this is going to look really similar to the types of things you saw in the work plan, right? Inputs are, what are you throwing at the project, right? In terms of people, partners, ideas, things that you're going to buy to support everything that you're kind of putting into the project to achieve the outcome that you want. Activities, what is it you're doing with all of those inputs? What are the things that people are doing to advance your project? Outputs, and this is another place where language matters to some agencies and not so much to others. I think this is USDA originally. Outputs are products or services, outcomes are changes that result. You know, and if you start with it all in a list and then break it out later, that's fine too. But, you know, so here my outputs are kind of my deliverables and my outcomes are more the milestones, I would say. So, you know, the outputs might be people soft skills training developed to move somebody through. An outcome might be a more qualified workforce that's job ready and, you know, able to retain and advance within a position. Everybody's super fun. And then they want you to break these into short term, middle term, long term. All of this may not be required. I actually prefer work plans to logic models, but I wanted to give you an example of both because sometimes you see both. So, and then again, this template here, a little bit, little different even than the annotated model, but again, it's giving you a space to just begin putting down these thoughts. So those, I think that's all of the different resources that I dropped in here. Again, there's a slide deck as well if you are interested in going through it. I think Amy covered 95% of what I had in here beautifully, but if you want to take that and take a look at it, please feel free. I'm going to leave this folder public for a few days. So if this looks helpful to you and you want to dump it all in a folder, that's great. And if you go to look for that later and it's not there, just shoot me an email and I'll send it. But we do use this in some of our non-credit courses, so I promised I wouldn't leave it open forever. So I'll stop there, and that way we can have some discussion, questions, anything else that was planned for the agenda.
Thank you, Courtney. That was awesome. So many fantastic resources.
Thanks.
Now it's up to you guys. Any questions? This is just really time for you to ask questions. If there's any things that we've created, questions that are stirring there for you, post those in the chat or feel free to unmute. What questions do you have for us?
Yeah, it's not SAM anymore. I forgot what it's called. It's UIN, maybe, unique identification number, something like that. That is dated. Responding to Kelly there in the chat.
Yep, I saw that. Any other questions? Everybody feeling comfortable now?
The other thing I'm happy to do, if anyone's interested, I'm going to put my email here in the chat. If anyone is ever in need of data for their proposal, that might be the section that I did skip in the presentation. I'm always happy to set up a Zoom and run through some reports on our MZ Analyst service. They're certainly free in public places. You can get it through Census Bureau or but if you ever need help pulling data for a proposal, please shoot me an email. It gives me an excuse to not write the grant I'm supposed to be working on. And I do that for a lot of folks who take our grant writing courses. So if you ever need, you remember, shoot me an email and we'll get something set up.
For them, you need or offer over to IDES. So
You broke up just a little bit for me there, Lee. I don't know if it was for everyone. Okay.
I don't have a connection issue, but we can always refer to you need or refer to IDES for data.
Awesome.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments? Courtney, you are a fantastic resource. This is fantastic. I texted Andy and said, wow, she is everything Lee sold you to be. So that's fantastic.
Oh, thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation as well.
Well, no, hold on there. I don't want Lee thinking he's got more credibility here. Let's not
okay.
peg to where they need to be. Thank you, Courtney. That was absolutely fantastic. And everybody loves downloads. That was awesome.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, with that, we can give you all 9 minutes back to your day. Thank you all for joining. You will be getting an email with an evaluation, so we do want to hear from you. And this is something that we're looking at a couple of these sessions. If you joined us last week for the case noting, and then this one with the grant writing and tips, we're going to be doing these quarterly. So possibly bringing in additional local individuals to share their best practices, but also at the same time, building on these great resources. So if you have any questions, send those our way. We always want to hear from the field as to what are those needs for professional development. And thank you all for your time this morning. Have a great day. And it's beautiful outside. So get outside and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you all.
Very nice meeting you as well. Have a great day, everyone.